more I investigated, the more I really saw a need. And I...
Second floor, there's somebody there.
Yeah. So anyway, that's why we're sort of here. Now, the thing is, what is the project? What is the mission of the HistoryMakers? The mission is that our goal is to create the largest archive that has ever existed of video oral histories. To the extent that there are already existing audio cassette interviews, and we have the capability of taking those in as donations, or existing video interviews and taking those as donations, we would be receptive as long as it doesn't tax our resources. Our goal is to create a digital archive. That'll be our delivery system that will be searchable by image and text and available to institutions around the country. And this is a very exciting time in our history because we just got awarded a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library and Sciences, and I consider this, a very, sort of a convergence. There have been these magical convergences along the way that have happened, but someone put me in touch with Professor Howard Wackler, who has been working for the last years with licensed footage from CNN and money from the Department of Defense and the National Science Foundation. And so our goal is to create a searchable database. He has this wonderful technology. You will see it. He's actually taken, I think, he said 20, but I think they're like 10 or 15 interviews in there. But he's showing how the archive can be accessed. There's a huge amount of labor involved. A lot of times when I tell people that this is a $30 million project, they can't fathom it. They're like, well, what's all that money going to? Is it salaries? And I don't know. It's really in the indexing and the archiving. It's extremely labor intensive. And it's a process that we started even 2 years ago and I backed away from and was interested in anyone who would sort of take it over. It's a thing, when I go out and talk to people, like I've been taking the laptop during the holiday break and saying, look what I've got on. And they're like, oh, I believe you. I'm like, but this is really exciting. Oh, I believe you. And like Lynn Whitfield told me recently, I don't want to know the background, foreground. I just want to know is the book in the library, if I go to the library. So here I found this wonderful technology, and I can only talk about the limited group. But you'll see it. But that's really exciting. That is, the thing is that this was not possible years ago. The technology simply did not exist. And in the archival area, we are on the leading edge of where things are. Textbooks will be written about what we do. There is not a prototype out here, really, for indexing oral history interviews. There's some thought about it, and we are a small subset. A lot of organizations, how you go and properly index. There's a whole vast view of that. Some people say just go do it every 2 minutes. Some people say come up with these index systems. It's not clear, and that's the thing that we're sort of embarked upon. The other thing that, as much as we are oral history project, and it's very important to me that, we follow the traditional methodology, even though some of that methodology is changing. In the past, people did not, I had an archivist here who thought I was like totally wasteful when I said I wanted to index internally within the transcript itself. Because in the past there were just not those resources that exist and the technology didn't exist. So if you had a finding aid, it would describe, generally what the interview was about and what existed. If you wanted to look at oral histories, they would say, okay, here's the shelf, go at it. There are the tapes. But what we're talking about essentially something that you could do keyword search and type things in, and it will be searchable by image and text. And that type of accessibility, especially as it relates to African American material, does not, exist. Now, that's happening across the country, with the projects. Now, the largest oral history project that has ever existed and will exist for any time, I see in the ever foreseeable future, is the Shoah Foundation project. And I was not aware of it when I first started the HistoryMakers. I started hearing about it as I was talking about what we were doing. And I've been out there, several times, not so much in the last 2 years. Steven Spielberg, after he did Schindler's List, he did 52,000 interviews, 18,000 here, and a massive operation. They probably had 6,000. Of the 6,000 people that worked on the project, 4,000 of them were volunteers. Everyone I talked to in the place was a Holocaust, their family had been a Holocaust survivor. They didn't create transcripts, which I found sort of strange. And historians, because they look sort of askance, they were like, they came out and they were like, did you have to do 52,000 to prove your point? And they are, in the process of really trying to index and catalog that. And originally it was going to take them something like 30 years, 10 years. But they've reduced something, so I really need to go back and see. But, about 2 years, they're saying, for it now. So anyway, we are, oral history project. We're also as much a public history project in terms of getting the history out into the public, and we have some, pretty exciting initiatives. We started out, with an annual event that we'll be doing, our 5th one this year, called An Evening with Harry Belafonte. And we've done it here, like I said, this will be our 5th year. We just finished an evening with B.B. King. We usually have 1,000 people in attendance. The unfortunate thing is people could not grab on to what archives were. They thought, that we were a documentary project, so they would say, to me, oh, is that what you do? This one thing a year. And I'm like, one thing a year. We started out in Chicago with 70 interviews the first year, just sort of testing things out. I often tell this story, during the first year when I was trying to struggle between, people who had names and no names. I was on my way to an interview with this Colonel Thompson, who's a Tuskegee Airman. And I, was thinking, why am I going to this interview? And so I went over there, and Colonel Thompson was part of the famous squadron. But he didn't fly, but he had been a documenter. In fact, he was the chief documenter for the squadron. And he had parts of planes. He had prepared for us like 4 days. He had boxes of photographs. And he sits me down and he says, do you know about the Golden 13? And I said, no, Colonel Thompson, I don't know about the Golden 13. And he said, well, they're the Navy's version of the Tuskegee Airmen, and there are 4 left living in the country, and 1 lives upstairs, and he'd like to talk with you also. And that's really, that said it all, because in many ways we are on a mission to really find and locate people. And Amy, who's taking a little nap over there, who's our DC coordinator. I know you guys have traveled, so that's why you're going to have dinner on your own. But Amy has been, I have to say this, she's been a real blessing and a find. I went to Amy back in July to ask her if she could help us source 100 interviews in Washington, D.C. before the end of this past year, July. And she said, sure, and that's what we did. So we have done an amazing work in a short period of time in Washington, D.C. But we need to do that in regions around the country. And my crew is really tired of traveling, They, as I was saying to the people on the end of the table, I've been between threatening, cajoling, and pleading, and they're not understanding my fixation with numbers, and getting them. But there's a process. Our goal was to get to 700 interviews this year. I'd like next year to do 600. I'm not as fixated on that as I am having a credible process that can be replicated, because who representing us in that market is extremely important to us. You're part of our development team, meaning our fundraising team. There's really very little money out here, none, for oral histories. I've, sort of begged, borrowed, and not stolen, but I've used every contact I've had. We've raised a little over $3 million to date. But the project is squarely at $30 million unless some of this technology and the processing can come down. And I'll give you an example. There's a woman who was here when we had a gathering of our boards this summer. Susan Madison heads up there the cable industry's oral history archive. And they processed 90 hours of their collection. It cost them $100,000 with a system called Barrage, which is probably the system that's probably most accepted. We have to date 2,100 hours, with the anticipation of 30,000. So that is where the labor really lies. And I, originally thought I would have all these retired librarians and school teachers, lined up, wanting to help out. I take them in that archive room, they're like, "You have anything else?" And so we really need, we need the age and experience in many ways. Youth helps, but, we need age and experience. And also things that are specific to a geographic region and time, those things are really, important. But like I said, we start out with 70 interviews the first year. The next year we did 80 interviews, mainly in New York and Washington, D.C. And then we were able to get a Knight Foundation grant. That was really helped nationalize us. And we did 28 interviews. We did interviews in 28 cities, because we did interviews in each of the Knight Foundation cities. So places as remote as North and South Dakota, and then Detroit and Miami, places like that. And that was really fascinating because there are places in the country that you don't think of typically in terms of our experience, and they have I was impressed with Denver, to be quite honest. It was a very diverse group in Denver. So there's a lot more searching that we need to do. And I want to say at the heart of this project, I wanted to, at the very beginning, what I was concerned about, what would stop the project? Besides money, what would be the things that stop? And I want to avoid crabs in the barrel. And I have to say that because collaborations are our big thing here. I went initially to, one of the people that was important for me was Howard Dotson at the Schomburg Library. And I went to him and I said, Howard, I'm planning on doing this. And I want to know, because I know you have an oral history collection, will there be a conflict? And he said no. And Howard he serves on our National Advisory Board. He's been very supportive. He said, as he said this summer, people say, well, is there a conflict? And he's like, no, because I'm not going to do what they're going to do. And we're all going to work together. And as he told me that day, video can be replicated. It can be shared. It's not like a piece of artwork. And so that is extremely important to us, and I think that has been helpful to us in our growth to date, because we've been interested in collaborating, whether it's on projects right now. We could get, documentary film producers, I'm probably their worst sort of nightmare. They, often say, well, aren't you producing things? Why are you producing them? And really, if you start producing too much, then you won't get to your end goal. And it's really important that process and the process have integrity. So I'll be talking to you a lot more about this, over time. But, the ethics are extremely important to me, extremely. I have, over the last 3 years, when I've tried people out, and I've seen how they've conducted themselves. Either there have been, I call the celebrity seekers, or the people with hidden agendas, or, and things. And I want to make sure that whoever is representing us well and representing us. Because this is a community that still, is learning to trust and open up. And the archive, while we don't have an ethics policy, that is something that's really sort of next on my agenda. Because as Lloyd Richards said to me, I trust you, but I don't necessarily trust who's coming behind you and how the archive will be used. So that's really, really important to me. We ask people, my legal background, as I said, helped a lot. We have people sign very full releases. They're as full as a release can be. Some people exempt out and say, for non-educational purposes. And I did that purposely because I didn't want the archive to be encumbered. And I did not want it to be hard to use. But on the other end of the equation, I feel a tremendous burden and responsibility to the people that are sitting down and agreeing to be part and to take part in telling their stories. So we had this year Allstate as used 12 of our history makers, and and corporations, and that's what we're learning. They sometimes get greedy, or they have other hidden agendas. But it was very important to me, though we had releases, and I didn't need to get a release, that we go back and we got them to sign separate releases and get their approval before they were featured on the calendar. And you will find that, and that's really important for any of you who will be involved in this project, that's extremely, extremely important to me. It's important that the project be promoted, that we get the word out, whether it's through, we've started a speakers bureau, we have an education institute, that's extremely important. But with that, I'm going to stop right now, and unless there are questions, I want to just turn it over, and we're running way behind because I've talked too long. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to talk about our programs and initiatives and, some things we have.
I have some more paper for you all that you're going to be overwhelmed with.
I knew it showed road. Empty one.
So I'm going to send one way. I could take one of those and then the other way. The large document, here actually, maybe let me grab that one on top. I don't have one with me. The large document on the top. Is actually a document that we, if I stand here, is this good? Yeah? Okay. It's a document that we developed for our National Planning Summit, which we held this year in July. It was a meeting of our National Advisory Board, which is an advisory board of professionals from a variety of fields. We have about 40 people that serve on that board. Our scholar consultants, which consists of about 20 scholars in the fields of African American history and American history, and our board of directors, which consists of 6 people at the moment, and it's a growing board. So we brought them together through a grant from the Chicago Community Trust to talk about how this organization is really going to grow into a national organization. So the theme of the summit was creating a national network. So just flipping through, you can see the definition of a history maker, which you have all, I'm sure, seen by this time. And our goals, which is to create the archival collection of 5,000 African American video oral histories. Now we have just 700 in the collection now, which is still makes us the largest in the country. And to expose the collection to the widest audience using the internet, public programs, our educational outreach, and to preserve the collection. So flipping through our audience, some of this, it makes no sense for me to repeat these things, but I'll try and elaborate where I see them. As Julie said, it's a $30 million project. And one of our goals is to create an endowment that will help ensure future operations once the project is complete. So that's a long-term goal. You can see that there's a chart. If you flip to page 6, there's a chart that's helpful in looking at how we need to grow. As Julie said, we started our first year with 12 interviews. This year we did, how many total? 400?
Yeah.
About 400 interviews. So you can see how it's growing. And it has to grow at a rate even faster than we've been growing to reach that goal. And the goal is now we're at 2008, saying 5,000 by 2008 now, which is slightly out of skew with what's shown here in this chart. The map that's here is the map that Julie referenced earlier with regard to the 9 foundation cities and helping to really nationalize the collection. We've expanded. There's a map on the other side of the archive door, which if you want to sort of compare between what we did at the end of last year and what we've done at the end of this year, you can see we've really grown, particularly in in the Northeast and in Washington, D.C. And without belaboring the point of funding, which can never, I guess, be belabored too much around here, we depend on, we've raised just under $3 million now. Our individual giving this year actually is closer now to 40,000. Mm-hmm. So we've really started to grow in that area, which is an area we need to exploit, particularly in the coming year. In-kind support, which we rely on tremendously. The Hilton Hotels Corporation puts our crews up around the country. American Airlines flies our crews around and brings in our celebrity talent for our event each year. IBM donated all the computers in the office. We had a wonderful in-kind gift from Roscor this year, which was an Avid editing system so that we can edit our Evening with B.B. King program here in the office and then prepare it for broadcast. So we really rely on those kinds of in-kind contributions, and almost any contact we make as a potential source for in-kind support. You can see some of the larger foundation grants we've received this year. A $100,000 grant from the MacArthur Foundation to support our Education Institute in Chicago Public Schools. And we got a $25,000 grant from the Boulay Foundation. So private foundations and corporate foundations. And this year has been good for us with grant. With the grants we got, especially with the IMLS grant for $167,000. So
despite the economy, say 03 has been.
Well,
No.
well, as
It's
Joe.
been a difficult year.
Well,
No, it's been a difficult year.
Well, I should say, it's a
Better than you
difficult.
expected.
Depends on perspective. But it's been a growth year, but it's been.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you're right about the economy, but I mean, in terms of the grants that we, I should do the percentages, but we've received, I don't know. I have to do the numbers. But the next page will give you a good indication of how frustrating it's been for us that 95% of the grants that we've received have been out of projects. So as Julie referenced, there's really no money for projects like ours. We've had to really mine foundations to support our education initiatives or other types of public programming that we do, but not for the archival collection itself and for collecting the interviews. So that's been a struggle. The Knight Foundation grant's the largest that we've had for that purpose. You can see some of the milestones that we have reached. Our current sort of projects are, of course, the website, which is our main sampling tool for the digital archive that's envisioned. And if you've had time to look at the website, you can see that there's, it's quite an extensive resource in and of itself, but it's not the full content database that we envision having. And Edward's going to speak more to the website further on. Our Education Institute this has actually been our pilot year. It's a year-long program which was launched. Really, last year we received an in-kind gift from the Wyndham Hotel here in Chicago to bring 60 of our history makers in for our annual event where they were honored. And we had them participate on thematic panels where we invited 300 students and teachers and librarians from the Chicago area to actually meet the history makers. And so we called the program Meet the History Makers, a Day of Education. And it was really a fabulous day, very exciting. And the feedback we got both from the students and teachers was that this needs to be more than just one day. And so we worked in association with Chicago Public Schools and with a woman named Dr. Barbara Radner, who's with the DePaul Center for Urban Education. You'll be meeting her later this week.
Tomorrow.
To develop a curriculum that's implemented year-long in Chicago Public Schools. We're working with 40 teachers in 20 schools to really integrate our material into lessons that, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just going to ask, have you thought about doing this national?
Yeah, but we're piloting here,
Yeah.
and it's best to pilot.
So we're just finishing our first year and learning a lot about not only just how to interact with school systems and teachers and students, which are totally different from what we had experienced, but really how to market it, how to get people to understand how to use it. But the curriculum is very rich, and we've gotten wonderful responses. In fact, some of the we had a student who actually interviewed one of our HistoryMakers and created a whole PowerPoint presentation with music and excerpts from the interview, and it's absolutely wonderful. When you see it, it's tremendous. Who did she interview?
She did, our former head of the seat, Renault Robinson.
Renault Robertson, that's right. So her teacher sent it in, we popped it in the computer, and we were like, she really interviewed him. She really tracked him down and did it herself. So it's inspiring students and teachers tremendously, and we're excited about the potential. We're trying to institute it once again. Trying to find the funding. It's about $600,000 for the pilot effort. So we're working to secure funding to keep it going. The Speakers Bureau, Crystal's going to be speaking in more detail about later, so I'll skip over. And of course, our programming and live events. We do a Black History Month program every year at the Chicago Cultural Center. Our PBS programs, the Celebrity Interview. And this year was going to be one of our most ambitious in terms of public programs and events. And occupying most of my time. This year we had a tea and book signing featuring Susan Vales Hill, which was, she wrote a book called Always Wear Joy. It was a memoir of her mother, Josephine Premis, who was a Broadway performer in New York, and was sort of a society event, and got out some people that we hope will be important sources of support for us moving forward, and we'd like to institutionalize that here as an annual event. We have next month, we're bringing Christine King Ferris, Dr. Martin Luther King's sister, from Atlanta here to address school assemblies, both in the Latin School, the Parker School here, and then in our Education Institute schools and Chicago Public Schools. So, and that's just through February. There's so much more. And I will, before you leave, give you a list of all those events so you can keep up to date on what we're doing. Some of the challenges you can see if you flip to page 12. We're a small organization where we have funding is always a problem. The archives, of course, are a tremendous source of labor for us. We need a tremendous amount of labor for. And really building the organization from the Chicago headquarters into these regional operations. And let's go back here, because this will sort of function as a roadmap for you about all that you'll be learning throughout the weeks. So. Actually, let's go to the next document that you have, which is what came out of the few days that we had with our various boards, which outlines really our roadmap for the year. I don't have one of those either. Thank you. We've really been focusing on what our mission statement says and how to move forward. We have committees that have been formed of our various board members, and they'll be working to sort of revise the way that we're able to describe what it is that we are and what we do, both in our vision and mission statement, and help to create print collateral that we'll be able to distribute so that people will have a clearer understanding of what it is that we want to accomplish, and hope to get them enthusiastic about it as well. You're part of number 2, which is to regionalize our operations while nationalizing our efforts, and to once again develop and process the archives, increase our visibility. The Education Institute, because there's this archive is really for educational purposes, to really focus on building that particular program. And once again, fundraising. This year we'll be taking our Evening With program not only as our 5th anniversary here in Chicago in October, but in Atlanta in June. We are hosting an Evening With, and we're hoping that it will be Diane Carroll that will feature there, but we're not sure now. In fact, just up this morning. And next month, or this month rather, Coca-Cola is hosting a luncheon for us to introduce us to the corporate community there, and hope to build a base of support to make it a true fundraiser. And that fundraiser will function really to underwrite the regional interview collection efforts in Atlanta. So it's very important for a number of reasons, both to get our name out there, but also to actually fund those efforts. Always looking for in-kind contributions, engaging the scholarly and professional communities more directly, and our staff to sort of give our organization a little more structure and look into our processes and how we're going to be growing over time. So it's a really critical time for us, particularly this year, because we have so many more eyes on us and what we're doing. And as representatives of the organization sort of going out and making connections with people, you really bring those messages to life. Are there any questions about the plan?
Can you just quickly go over the events?
All of the events?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
As I mentioned, this month we're having our Black History Month program at the Chicago Cultural Center, which is founded by...
Next month.
Next month, February.
Mm-hmm.
January.